Welcome to our deep dive. Once again, officially on the road to Superman and Fantastic Four at the same time. Why these movies are important, right? We've talked about why Fantastic Four as characters are important, and we've talked about why Superman as a character is very important, why that matters, right? But we haven't talked about exactly why these movies matter. A lot of people, I think, kind of have negative impressions, right, about Superman and Fantastic Four. Spider Brando, what do you feel like you personally, right? Because I think you're someone kind of like all three of us, right, that have only gotten into them more recently, a little more hardcore. What do you feel like your personal hurdles have been in terms of Superman and Fantastic Four?
I think one is just like the what's the word? Quantity of content growing up. I haven't had much Superman content that's been as like popular or like brought into my life as compared to Batman, Spider-Man, other heroes like that. And same with Fantastic Four. Like sure there was Man of Steel that I had and then Batman, first Superman and Justice League. And ongoing now is like my adventures with Superman, but I don't know. I was never really like exposed to them, so they just never hit like that mainstream type level. And same with Fantastic Four. I love growing up Fantastic Four 1 and 2, but looking back at them now, those are some cheeks. But like as a kid, I was like, "Oh yeah, that's cool." But they never had like as many TV shows as Spider-Man had, so I never got to see different versions of them. It was always just those couple, and that's just eh. Um, so being able to go and get fresh takes, potential fresh takes, and like what we've been talking or following along production wise the last couple months. It's really exciting for me as someone getting into these characters to get like faithful comic adaptations. Like New has always hyped about going into Deadpool and Wolverine, getting that iconic Wolverine suit. As I've been learning more and more about these characters, I'm hoping to build that hype up for Superman and Fantastic Four when they come out next July.
Very
Yeah.
nice, very nice.
Hero, what's been your hurdle?
For me personally, I think it's a combination of just the internet and seeing how these characters have been portrayed possibly better in films in other genres like anime, right? Where I think we've talked about this a lot before, where you have your overpowered character be presented really well in animes like My Hero and many others. Um, you have that family dynamic be presented better, right, than in Fantastic One, Two, and then the newest or the latest Fantastic Four that came out. They don't let you have that connection, right? And I'll be honest, I'm not, even though I'm into comics, I'm not someone who has read a lot of Fantastic Four and Superman. So I think kind of like what Spanner Brando is saying, it comes out of a place of ignorance in a way of these characters, not knowing enough about them. And that really lets you form and just kind of say things that people who don't know as well. It lets you be more agreeable to those things they say, where they're like, "Oh, Superman's a boring character because he's overpowered and he doesn't," or Fantastic Four are just boring people because they're just a family and there's other families in comics too, blah blah blah. So it's like you have all these things in your ear, and because you don't know enough, you just go along with it. And I think that's kind of what's been happening. But when you open your mind up and you start reading and you start really realizing what they represent and what they are and what they do, it becomes very different.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I've been seeing a trend on Twitter recently where people would just compare to the canon, like what's actually canon to the character versus the fanon of what the fans think is canon. And what you just described was like, I felt like you were on my For You page this entire time. Because when you look into, I saw one for Superman. I wish I had it or could reference it, but I saw one for Superman, and it kind of attacked a lot of the Snyder Superman fans. So I'm sorry, Snyder fans, but also not so sorry. And like it broke down all the canon events of how he's just super smart, obviously, like just so much things that the common person doesn't really realize about Superman. And then the fan in of how everybody just thinks he's just one bad day away from being a freaking devil, or just like the injustice line thing, which yes and no, it's not just one bad day. It's there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, but people don't realize that. So yeah, I think just based on the type of movies we've had and mainstream stuff we've had over the last couple of years, these movies are important to remarket what Superman and Fantastic Four are.
Just to follow up on that from my perspective, the big thing for me of why these movies are important is it's going to showcase what it means to be human in two very different ways. And I think a lot of people miss that because you have, for Superman, you have again an OP character who has a very out of this world, no pun intended, power set. And then for the Fantastic Four, you have a group of fantastical characters that are very unique in certain ways. Not so unique on an individual level, but unique in the way that they interact together, given what their abilities are and how they, had their origins. And I think that goes into the biggest hurdle for me is I never felt that it was an exploration of what it means to be human in a lot of ways when it comes to live action interpretations of both Superman and the Fantastic Four. I think that they tried and they swung and they miss in a lot of ways because they weren't grounded. And I know that's really hard to say for, again, two movies that are, they're way out there. They're very cosmic in their own sense. But it's that relatability, that human aspect, what it means, what's your brand of justice? How do you really portray with great power comes great responsibility? That's exactly what happens with both of these two characters. More specifically, if we boil down Superman and Reed Richards. So these are going to be really important, based on how they explore those two main characters and what foundation do they give us moving forward because they're both going to be in their respective universes for a long time. Long, maybe a little bit different in the MCU, just in terms of frequency of appearances, maybe not length of years, like a decade. But if they can get over the darker aspect in terms of tone and style and really play in the darker aspect of what is good, what is bad, and give you that, I think these portrayals of these teams and individual characters will be some of the best we've ever seen in live action since 1989.
Ooh. I want to bring up a quote from Grant Morrison that struck a chord when you were talking about the humanity in Superman. Let me screen share real quick. But he had pretty much discussed about American writers often say they find it difficult to write Superman. They say he's too powerful. You can't give him problems, but Superman is a metaphor for him. Superman has the same problems we do as a human, but on a Paul Bunyan scale. If Superman walks the dog, he walks it around the asteroid belt because the crypto or the dog can fly in space and he can fly in space. But he's still walking his dog like a human to relieve some stress. When Superman, or to do with pet owner's duty as well. When Superman's relatives visit, they come from the 31st century and bring some hellish monster conqueror from the future, just like when family members bring their in-laws over. But it's still a story about your relatives visiting. And such a human aspect has truly been lost about these characters, like you mentioned. And reading this quote and knowing how well received a lot of Grant Morrison's Superman stories are, and dealing with like the humanity of Superman, makes me want to pick that omnibus up like right now and start reading it.
Yeah. It's a very nice quote, and it's mainly also because when you start reading the comics and really seeing how they are, and realizing what they stand for too, right? That's when you start seeing that relatability within them. And I think a very good example of that for Superman is Superman for All Seasons, where it's just Superman going through life as a teen into a young adult, and how he deals with the changes of wanting to be there for his family, wanting to protect what he can, which I think is a very normal thing that anybody would want to do, no matter what position you are in. It's him dealing with him losing and gaining love. It's him dealing with moving away from his family and how that affects him. Fantastic Four in a similar way, where it's like a lot of people are obsessed with just getting the Maker, right? They want to see the Maker right away. They're like, hey, the Maker's going to be so cool when he comes out. But the problem with the Maker is that the Maker won't hit as hard unless you have a Reed that you can understand and relate to. Where Reed, yes, he is incredibly smart, but he's so smart that sometimes he falls into the thing that, let's be honest, all of us as humans have done from time to time. We get too confident in ourselves and it lands in his face, or him obsessing over something so much that it makes him become blind to red flags and lose focus, right? Where I think, and Spider-Man, or like we were saying earlier in our keep reading, which is why I personally really like Fantastic Four Life Story. I know it's kind of a rehash of comics, but so is Spider-Man Life Story. So I feel like the people that say that kind of are off base when it comes to that. It's just a very more real human story that goes into the eyes of the Fantastic Four. And for example, it takes a deep dive into what happens if just Reed obsesses over something for so long. What happens? What happens if that is literally his life? How does that affect other people? How does that affect the world? And sometimes that's relatable because we see people go through that. We know someone who probably is that way.
Yeah.
We know someone who's probably in the same situation as the Thing, where, of course, they're not some sort of rock creature, but they have self-confidence issues.
Yeah.
They feel like they don't deserve to be loved. But yet here they are. It's very fundamental human things, right? And then going back to something that Minty said, I see a lot of people when it comes to Fantastic Four and why they don't like it. They say it's very cookie cutter superhero stuff. But what we have to remember is they were the first ones to do it. They established a lot of stuff. A lot of the tropes that we love is because of the Fantastic Four. So without them, and Superman, you don't get those things. You don't get that. You don't get a family of comics without Fantastic Four. You don't get your overpowered super person going through things without Superman.
I got a quote to add. You don't get comics without Superman. A quote from Hero from a prior episode. And if anyone could clip that quote and send it to me, you get a Funko too.
Yeah, specifically from Spider-Man and not from me, because I didn't offer that. But
yeah, I got a lot to get rid of. I can't buy a song. And
but yeah,
boosting engagement.
Boosting engagement for sure. But yeah, no, I agree. It's these movies are going to be incredibly important. And hopefully they lay that groundwork of Lou, like you said, really making them relatable in their own different ways, to where someone can look at Johnny, Sue, Reed, Ben, Superman, Clark, Lois, and really see that themselves in those characters.
I want to add this one thing because I think we've talked about each of these movies on an individual level. How could they be kind of the best that they can be on their own? But I like the fact that, as we've been on this road to Superman and Fantastic Four, it sounds like leading up to the movie that each of these characters are going to be living in or coming from a world that has existed. And I think that's something that's going to be very refreshing because it gives them the ability to really create this world through the eyes of the character instead of letting the world create the character as this is an origin. And I think that was a big mistake in a lot of ways for both of the last iterations of these movies of, well, the original of, Man of Steel. He was really molded by his world.
Yeah.
And he will be, and he is. But what I mean is, for that first impressions piece that we were kind of talking about, there's so much more. So when we see something about the character, we know that there's a lot of history, and that history, once we fill those gaps, is going to help develop their future. That's something. There's, it's zero, but we're going to go into the negatives type of thing. That's not really how it was when we got, Fantastic Four, one, and then again the 2015. It was New World. Here it is. It's established, but it's a go forward type of thing. Again, leading to kind of nowhere. Each of these characters are going to come from a place where stuff has already went down, and we're going to have to figure out and kind of have that mystery and intrigue of who are they, who were they, and kind of what will they be. That's going to help, I think, catapult them into a level that we haven't gotten with either of them in, some say, ever, live action, and kind of a long time from a comic, reader perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be nice to really see them get their time in the sun again. Right. And maybe the problem with the general audience is that since they've been around so long, people just think we've seen everything we can with these characters, and they tend to fall out of popularity to newer characters, to different characters, right? Because again, when you think about it, Superman's been around for so long, and then in reality, so have the Fantastic Four. So, it's been a while since we've seen them on screen. So hopefully, this absence really lets people develop a taste for them again. But I think it's an exciting time to be a fan for both of these franchises, right? Whether you just like the movies or you read the comics as well. It's a very good time to try and get into them. That's why actually next week, kind of a little peep for next week's deep dive, we're going to be talking about the history of Fantastic Four in comics. We're going to be talking about different stories, different ones, and why they are the way that they are, how they're looked upon. So if that's something that interests you, definitely make sure you come back here to Point 3 Podcast to be, educated, and let's just talk about it, because these are super, super interesting conversations because of that. So